outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Late Show with myself, Lee Pace. Good to have you if you're listening live. If you're not listening live and you're on record, also good to hear from you. Really lucky tonight to have two incredible guests. Hope you picked up on social media that we're going to be talking all things reading, probably leaning into wider literacy with some oracy and some writing as well. So hopefully it'll be a great show. The show can't happen obviously without our sponsors. So this show, we've got a few on board for this show. So we've got Hachette Learning. So they're one of our partners, our publishers and professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. So level up your professional development today and visit hachetlearning.com to explore the full range of titles. And also a huge thanks to the Bet Show. Join Bet for the biggest week in education from the 21st to the 23rd of January 2026 in the XL London with immersive workshops, thought-provoking speakers, hundreds of hours of CPD accredited content, cutting-edge technology and unrivaled networking. There's no opportunity quite like it for educators. And you can get free tickets today by visiting uk.betshow.com. So thank you for those sponsors. So the year of reading. My experience of reading, I thought I'd start with this because I was talking to my guests who will introduce them in a second. I never realised I was brought up in a reading household till I actually started to talk to one of my guests, Caroline, about it. And my first books I remember are Thomas the Tank Engine books because I'm a train spotter. I have to include this in every single show that I do. I'm a train spotter. Thomas the Tank, little books. And I still think they were at my mum's, and I still think there's some pages ripped out where I probably just ripped them out as a 5-year-old, scribbled over them. But they were books, and they're still lovely books as well. And I remember having some dinosaur books. And in my first job, when I became an NQT teacher, and I had a boy who was very disaffected with reading, and I thought, well, I'm sure, because you're very idealistic at the time, still am. I'd give him my dinosaur book, and he was like 11, and he just ripped it up. I kind of forgive him now. That's one of my favourite books, but that was where he was at the time. And my other memory of reading, I think, as a youngster, is my dad's reading cabinet. So growing up in the 80s, you had a reading cabinet, or we did, not a reading bookshelf. And it had like glass doors at the front. And it's just jam-packed full of railway books. That wasn't that interesting because it's steam and I'm into diesel. So, that's where I was at. So I was brought up with reading. And I think as a result, I had a huge advantage as a result. Anyway, enough about me. My guest first. I'll go on my screen from left to right. So, Caroline, tell us a little bit about you and what you do and why you think of that. That's 3 questions, isn't it? I always say to teachers, 1 question at a time, because teachers do this. We can only ever ask 3 questions at a time. You probably had that feedback off me. Yes, about you, Caroline.
So I am a reading champion and work in cover supervisor and work with Lee in middle school. I'm also a volunteer literacy champion for the National Literacy Trust in Stoke-on-Trent. And I am a uni student studying English literature and creative writing, as well as a mum and an nana as well. So my reading journey, and I don't think I've told you this, Lee, I also used to be an avid Thomas the Tank fan. And I've still got my Thomas on the bookshelf in my dining room. And I just used to love reading and looking at books when I was little. I used to have the Sentinel. My mum and dad had the Sentinel. I used to sit and read back and look at the pictures. And it's always been a big part of my childhood, is being exposure to reading and listening to Black Beauty on LPs and things like that. So yeah.
Wow, Black Beauty. That's a throwback.
Yeah, and an LP.
Yes, I know. Okay, Martin.
Hi, I'm Martin Galway. I'm Head of Professional Learning and Partnerships at the National Literacy Trust. So been with the Trust 3 years in September. Prior to that, I was a teaching and learning advisor at Hearts for Learning, now at HFO Education. Did lots of great work there with the team, not least all that exciting work around reading fluency. But before that, primary teacher for a long time. Really was where I really found myself, if that makes sense, having been a bit drifty in my 20s. And yeah, like you both, avid readers in many senses. Favourite book from when I was a childhood was actually down to a really brilliant teacher, Mrs. Jessup. Shout out to Mrs. Jessup. In what would it have been? Because it wasn't like year 3, 4. It would have been second year juniors. And she knew how to tell a story. And she read us a book called The Ghosts by Antonia Barber, I think it was. And that book, she knew how to read a book and have you absolutely desperate for the next bit. She, it was before Netflix when you could download the whole stuff. You had to wait for the next chapter, and she made us wait at just the right moment. So she really got us hooked. And funnily enough, I got the chance to thank her. I bumped into her in a doctor's reception in Harlow, where I grew up and lived for most of my life. And it was really lovely to have that moment just to thank her, because she definitely set the course for me in my life.
I just sparked a memory of mine as well, Mr. Ollerhead. It would have been called year 3 in juniors. That'll be year 5 now, I think. Yeah. And he used to read stories, and he'd be marching around the room reading stories. And I copy his method. I walk around the room reading. I'm not as exuberant as he was, but he was absolutely inspirational. And he's got a bookshop. I know his family in a bookshop now in Crewe. Coppenall bookshop. So I wanted to go and visit him. I've not managed to go and visit him yet. So yeah, it is Coppenall bookshop. So there you go. There's a little plug for the bookshop. So I think reading's so important. But I suppose the title of this show is the Year of Reading 2026. So if I can go to you, Martin, can you tell us a bit more about what that means, how the project came about, and so on?
Sure. So the Literacy Trust, has been around 30 years. We're an independent charity working across the 4 nations. We do communities work, so we do a lot of place-based work. We have school programs. We have criminal justice work. We work across the piece, really, to try and narrow gaps in terms of literacy, but also we're concerned about social equity, and in particular addressing where there's economic challenges. So that's a big part of our mission. And we also have a very well-established and respected research team who have been carrying out an annual literacy survey for over 2 decades now. And that's really helpful in that survey reaches an awful lot of children and young people across the UK. So in 2024, we saw a really, really troubling drop in terms of the data around children and young people that report enjoying reading. It was a drop that actually caused us to have some private angsty conversations, because it was so extreme. And at that point, we declared it as a crisis. Across the next year, there were conversations across a range of sectors, because as a charity, we work with government, we work with trusts and foundations, we work with corporate partners, we work with literacy sector partners. And I remember going to a book seller conference, and there'd been a real energy in the room and an animation about, we need to do something about this. So that was the 2024 report. And then 2025, we saw a much smaller dip, thank goodness, because it couldn't have got much bigger, but it was still a minor dip. So the position hadn't improved. It wasn't like it was a blip year, because you can sometimes have those. It's basically confirmed there really is a problem here with reading for pleasure. And I'm sure it will come out as we move through the programme, but there are so many positive associations with reading for pleasure in terms of attainment, well-being, future life chances, and, if nothing else, if you're a skilled reader, you read more. If you read more, you learn more. You learn more about language. You learn more about the world. You cope with demands across the curriculum better. And in order to be that sort of a motivated volitional reader, you need to feel good about it. So it's especially important for us as educators, those of us working in the education sector, have a key role to not just work on that will part that's really central to the campaign. Let's get volitional reading going on. Let's get children, feeling better about themselves as readers and about the act of reading. But actually, for us in the education sphere, that's also going to have benefit because there's that reciprocal feeding from the real into skill and vice versa. And so that's something that me as a teacher educator who really cares about children's literacy really wants to see come out of this year. Reaching the unconverted, those that maybe think reading for pleasure, because the phrase itself is quite problematic at times. We find that. It's a discussion we'll have across the year. It won't be the main discussion, but it's something we will be exploring because it's not desirable extra. It's actually really important and it fuels a lot of great learning.
Yeah, I think I agree. The phrase like reading for pleasure, it's whatever brings you pleasure, really, isn't it, I suppose. So I read lots of articles, Carl Hendricks and people like that who sometimes hurts my brain, but I quite like my brain to hurt.
Yeah, I mean,
and at the same time, some people want to just go off on a complete in a surreal world. It might be science fiction, and
that's the thing. It's so that reading for pleasure. We're talking about volitional reading. You choose to read for a reason. It might be started by someone else. So it could be something that starts in school, but that you choose to continue it because of what you're getting from it. And there's a phrase we're using more and more, personally meaningful reading, because that could extend to, I'm reading this recipe or process to understand how something works. I mean, I'm also a grandparent, Caroline, and my little granddaughter, Amy, she's obsessed with those YouTube videos, how a toothbrush is made. Kids like to know how things work. And so much of our world is mediated through written language. And so it's really important that we're doing our best to equip children to be as proficient as they can as readers as early as possible. Yeah. And, you can't mandate a love of reading. There was a brief flurry where Ofsted were talking a lot about love of reading. And I was involved in some discussions with Ofsted around that. And I said, believe it or not, someone who really advocates for reading, I couldn't get my son to love reading, but he does it. And it's like, it's not about mandating a love. That's not a fair ask of any educator. It's about helping them see that there are some ways that won't add too much to the workload burden, but that can shift the way reading is perceived. So a big part of the campaign is drawing upon other research we've carried out that shows some of the problems are around, for some children, reading has become too much like work, or it's been too disconnected from what they're interested in. And I mean, you can't shift the curriculum to cater for every child's interest. But what we can do is do something more around flagging what kids might be interested in by, making reading very obviously relevant to them by leaning upon different forms of reading. And that could be the genre of the reading, could be the actual tech that, if they're accessing reading through means other than printed books.
I think moving on to that then, Caroline, because it's the year of reading. So reading's got to be very high profile this year. And you recently, I think it was November, wasn't it, Caroline, went to Downing Street. So tell me about your visit to Downing Street.
It was a bit of a shock to be asked to go, to be honest. But I went with my son, Jaden. He's a literacy champion as well. And we went with Jonathan Douglas, who's the CEO of the National Literacy Trust, and David Heyman. He was the director of Reading 26. And we had an address by Keir Starmer, and he said we needed to tell the ministers what we needed from government to help in society, what we needed. So, Jaden, one of the things we do at home as literacy champions is at Halloween, rather than giving out sweets, we give out books. We have our own mini literacy festival, if you like, on the drive, and we give out books. We give over 100 out every year, and it's become a thing now where people will come to our house for a free book off the National Literacy Trust. So he was telling Keir Starmer about that, and Keir Starmer said, why do you think people aren't reading? What is something that's holding them back? And Jaden said, people can't afford books. So like round here in Stoke-on-Trent, poverty and things, it's the cost of living, it's an issue. So that's where book gifting, what we do as literacy champions, really comes into its own in ensuring that children and adults can get their hands on books. Then I spoke to the Education Secretary of Jaden, and he told her about his school at the moment. Well, he didn't at that time have a library. They had online reading, but they didn't have a physical library in a secondary school. And he said that he wanted a library like at my mum's school, which is an excellent example. I've told Mrs. Shelley, our librarian, that. And he wants that in his school. So for his peers and for him to access, because he struggles with reading online. So what his head teacher's done, they've got him a trolley, and the NLT have given some books for his trolley, and he's set up his own little library now, which he wheels around form times and stuff. And school are working on getting a library together now. He's their literacy champion in school. And I said to, so the NLT, please step in and correct me if I'm wrong here, Martin, I've got the libraries for primaries. So every primary school in the country will have a library in primary school by the end of government term, which is phenomenal. It's needed. And I said this to Bridget Phillipson, it is very much needed. But we can't give them all that in primary and then it not be there in secondary. We need it to extend beyond that throughout all education, especially when we've got the year 8 reading test coming in. There's going to be that 2-year gap between year 6 and year 8 with the access to reading. That reading culture is always fluid throughout all schools. And it needs funding as well. It does need funding.
Have they put £5 million in? That doesn't sound a lot to me. Pounds and pence doesn't sound a lot for a whole secondary for libraries. I know some secondaries will have them. I'm not saying they won't, but
oh gosh, some secondaries have got amazing setups, and it needs to be fluid throughout all education.
Yeah.
And
what I love Jaden's done is, I'm going to make the assumption that within the school there's probably not much space for a library, so that's the trolley. But at the same time, I mean, we're colleagues, aren't we, Caroline? We're very, very lucky with the space. But also, we've done a very long-term investment in the library, haven't we? We continue to invest. And our parents were incredible at donating books as well, a lot of box of books come through in excellent condition. We put them in the library. So
it is something that takes time. It does take time to build on. It's not
how many books have we got? How many books have we got? I'm not showing off or nothing like that, but how many books in our library?
9,011.
9,011.
But Mrs. Shelley has been cataloguing books, so we should imagine about 9,500 now.
Yeah. One of the things I saw, I think it was on the news. I think it was on Midlands Today, because we're in the Midlands, and it was talking about a library. I can't remember the town. But it was a threat of closure about 10 years ago, and I think a local group leased it. They sort of won the lease. However, they got the lease for that. And what they did, they opened the library, but they also opened they could buy tea and coffee in there, and also in the evening they did bands and things like that. So it was almost a space for bands to play or for stand-ups to perform, a performance space. And I always make parallels or something else. People always talk to me about, is a curriculum fit for purpose? Does it need upgrading? Does the idea of a library need a rethink? Because I think when I think of a library, it's a very, very quiet space. And I think it's really useful if you want to study, of course. But does it need redefining, I think, the idea of a library?
I think it's being done because I mean one of the joys of this job, I was involved in the team that orchestrate libraries for primaries for quite a while, and therefore had the privilege of working with so many brilliant sector partners. So that would be publishers, it would be authors and creatives, but librarians and the library sector, the organisations we work with, like ASCL, Libraries Rising, Libraries Connected, School Library Association, local library authorities, school library services. the innovation that goes on is quite amazing. So we mentioned being in the Midlands. As you know, I last year moved up from Harlow because, born and bred, I felt 54, ready to make a move. I'm up in near Chesterfield, but it's allowed me to really reach out into some of the areas that we have hubs in, because we have the number I think was last time I checked about 22 hubs. I probably should know exactly, but it's a moving picture. And I went to an event in Birmingham, and it was so dynamic. We had people from Birmingham itself, from Samwell and other areas, and they were sharing so many great ideas. And I think one of the challenges is, how do we share that best practice? So it's actually quite an opportune moment for me to mention one of the things that will be on offer universally, free to access for all schools, and that's all schools across the UK and beyond. We're not setting any parameters around, which nations can take part or access that. Is we will have a learning management system that will allow us to do all kinds of things. We're going to help people navigate through the year so they can design their own journey in terms of what professional development they might take part in, what special events for children they might take part in. And it'll all be recorded if it's online. So that's going to be there all year. So you don't have to be there for the live moment. But one thing that we are going to be doing is having space for sector partners to be able to showcase their work. But for schools and other settings like that, early year settings, they can share best practice, case studies, action research, so that we get a real legacy we don't want it to just be, it can't be a 1 year wonder. This is essentially a behaviour change campaign. So we want to share and showcase the very best practice, much like the Open University do. They have a really brilliant website that showcases best practice in relation to reading for pleasure within schools. So we want to supplement by stretching across as many, the sectors as possible, across the phases, across the 4 nations, so we can just really show what innovations are happening, because libraries are being redefined. I mean, before I left Harlow, they were redesigning that library, and they brought a cafe in there. First of all, there's no end of cafes in Harlow, and they're popular. People want to go and have a warm drink. And another thing we do in Libraries for Primaries is we have a diverse libraries series of webinars that look at representation in all its very many forms. And that's so important. We all know that. Children need to see themselves in books. But a session that we did with 3 autistic authors and picture book creators was really interesting, because they talked about how A, the library was a sanctuary for them, and B, how it was a creative space for them. And that's something that we're really working on as well, because libraries are including all kinds of workshops where people can go and sit and talk and craft or do whatever. And it's kind of like taking people into a reading environment, making sure it's welcoming. And that welcome is really important. I have to say as well, I mean, some cultures won't necessarily feel that libraries are for them. In some cultures, the library might be more about being an academic space. And so it's really important we're thinking about, how do we design this so that people see themselves in it and feel this is a threshold over us. So, I mean, I can understand why you're saying that, because there is quite a steadfast image of what libraries might be. And if we've then that's what we can end up thinking it is. But it's actually a lot more exciting than that nowadays, I feel.
Yeah, and that's why I asked you on the show, Martin, because you've got a much wider perspective than I would have as an educator that kind of lives in a school. I think the students think I live in the school. But, and to be fair, our library isn't a silent space. We have clubs in there, and a crochet club that I've sometimes attend. I haven't attended for a while. I know Mrs. Shalley, I will apologise in the morning because it's so difficult to do it. But it's just been in that space where there's loads and loads of books. So, I thought, right, so I'm going to ask a really, really obvious question now, but I think it's really pertinent to schools. It's the most obvious question you could ask, I suppose, was, why is reading important? Caroline, can I ask you first? Why is reading? Because you are incredibly. If I see Caroline in the staff room, I have to make sure I've got half an hour to talk about reading. So
yes, you do. At least reading is everything. It's communication. So even though, people go, "Oh, I don't read." My husband, I don't read. So how do you know who scored at Vale last night then? And who how do you know what's happening with the manager? Well, I saw it online. I read it on the paper, on the Sentinel website. And it's like, you're reading. Reading's everywhere. And so it isn't just picking up a book and reading a book. It is, if someone's ill and they have medication off the doctor, they need to be able to read what they need that medication for, how to take that medication. So, if it's physical health, it's about emotional literacy. If you can't communicate, properly. You can't talk about your feelings, your mental well-being. So you need that. Academically, academically, it improves. Your academic life does. It's everything. It is an everything.
I think the academic side, I know it's weird. I don't think it's almost like I suppose as a teacher, you read by osmosis. I'm not actually reading by osmosis. I've learned to read, obviously, but I don't think about I'm reading. I just read. And I think sometimes when you ask somebody about why is something important, I imagine if you couldn't read. And I think people really, if people can't do maths, they kind of open about it, aren't they? It's kind of doesn't matter. I don't know my times tables. I don't know trigonometry. I don't care. I don't see the point in algebra. If I can't read, it's really people go to incredible lengths to hide the fact they can't read. Yeah. I think conversely, that's how important reading is.
Yeah. It is. I mean, I have had since I've been a literacy champion for the NLT. I think it's about 4 years. I think nearly 5 years now. I think without looking, but since I've been doing it, I've had neighbours and friends be like, "Caroline, will you help me with this? I can't read." One of my friends, he'd never ever read a book from beginning to end ever. But he'd seen that an influencer on Facebook and YouTube and that they had written a book. It's not a massive book, but it's a really good book. And I'd bought this book. It was about ADHD. And he was like, "Oh, I'd love to be able to read that." And I gave it him. I was like, "Have a go." And he sat and read it. It took him ages, but he sat and read it. And then he cried because he'd actually read a book. Now he'll come to me and be like the Halloween, can I have a Paddington Bear book so I can practice reading, so I can read it with my little girl? And it's beautiful. Yeah. So it isn't just about getting children to read, it's about helping the adults to read too. Yeah. Because what you find is it becomes generational, the struggles with literacy. So, and I love go all in for this because I was reading on the website the other day that the term 1 is classroom based and on a personal level. Term 2 is about whole school, and then the third term is about the community. So it moves through all three to incorporate absolutely everybody. And it's just so important from communication, from oracy, everything. You need everything.
Anything tried on that, Martin? It's a simple question, but
how long has it
It's a very wide question.
I mean, I could go on forever because this has been my obsession. So when you were saying earlier, you choose to read Carl Hendricks for pleasure. There was a long period, mainly from the glory days of Twitter, as it was, where there was such an explosion of great CPD. So when I was in the classroom, when I first discovered EduTwitter, and it was kind of really great for me because I was kind of voracious. I mean, one of the things I love about education and why I was really happy when I found education is I can't be bored. You will never be bored. And actually, it's not just education. If you drill into just reading alone, when I did my MA, it was about literacy and literacy difficulties, and it was a brilliant course. I pretty much skipped seminars. But I went through a crisis at one point where I was like, oh my gosh, I thought I knew most of what there is to know about reading. I will never know everything I want to know about reading. There's always something new you can find out. Because in some ways, you can almost be surprised there's not more reading difficulties, because reading is hard, right? We've got to accept that first. Reading in English is hard work. We've got to understand that because we're forcing our brain to do something that's not biologically primary, is the way that we might term it. We are using parts of the brain that weren't designed to do that thing, but it is tapping into things that there is a biological imperative for. So taps into language, of course, but the beauty of reading is it's more fully formed. We might talk later about oracy, but spoken language is very different to written language. It's more considered. You'll get, Philip Pullman writes an 8-clause sentence in his children's books in places. That's not how you'd talk, or you'd have a lot of moments where you break off or you interject or you have to do and think about it. You can get transported. I mean, I love talking to parents about reading, and I say to them, put your hands up if any of you have ever been naughty and skipped to the end of a book, and then ask them to tell me why they did it. And they'll say, well, I had to find out if they were going to be all right. And I'm like, how weird is that? You're reading characters on a flat page, literally printed characters, and from that you're creating language. But not only that, you're creating worlds, and you are actually caring about people that don't exist necessarily unless it's non-fiction. So it does great things in the brain. Your brain changes every time you read, I believe. That's you're somewhat different. Keeps the brain active. It correlates really strongly with empathy, and we know that empathy is, well, actually some people don't realize how important empathy is. I think they think that's a desirable extra, but actually empathy really does power attainment. It powers problem solving. It makes you far better placed to navigate working spaces. So there's that benefit. There's exposure to vocabulary, learning new things about the world that you might not otherwise encounter, being transported, seeing yourself. There are real mental benefits. And if you look at the reading framework, if you look at the introduction to the reading framework, there's the initial session is actually called Why Reading Matters. So that's a really good way to get a comprehensive answer. And there is a section on reading for pleasure. Now, that was missing from the first draft of the reading framework. So the first one came out, I think, 21. The second one came out 2023. And there's a chapter on reading for pleasure. And it's also mentioned in the introduction. And it talks about how robust evidence suggests that reading transcends so many of the socioeconomic challenges people can face, that it can mediate what your current economic circumstances are. Now, one thing I want to say, because I think some people, there is a danger that, if we fix reading, we've fixed it all. No, we won't. We won't put food on tables. We won't put shoes on children's feet that need it. But what we'll do is open up options. And so, as someone who grew up in a community that would be termed disadvantaged, did have free school meals for a period, was living in social housing, you could read some of the narrative in education over recent years, and it says reading can help you transcend your background. And I find that one really offensive. I don't want to transcend my background. I love going back home. I love being in that community, but it means I can move between, and I can be aware of things. I can make choices. So I just feel it enables choice above all else. It enables choice because so much of our world is mediated through print.
Thank you. I think one thing I want to talk about is barriers to reading, and the reading just popped to my head as I think it's your fault, Martin, because you talked about reading as it's not biologically primary, so you're in my world then. It's just like, oh yeah, I like this sort of stuff, but also the research. So I remember reading Why Kids Don't Like School by Daniel Willingham, and he uses reading quite a lot as a platform to explain things, and I think it's really
remind me to come back on that. I've got to come back on Daniel Willingham at some point, please. Okay. All right.
And the one thing I did, and I've used it in training as well. So, and I saw this as a barrier. So he had a quote, and I've just wrote the quote down. I haven't got the book here, just to remember it from the book. So he said, "Imagine reading this to a child." And it said, "The customer." So this might be a phrase from a book or something they read. So the customer didn't tip the waiter because he spilled soup on her lap. So there's loads and loads of language in that. Loads and loads of language. So to me, and then he dissected that. So the idea of a tip. Now, when I was growing up, a tip was somewhere where you dumped all your rubbish. You stuck it in the back of your boot. Okay. They might not know what lap means. They might not know what a waiter is.
Yeah.
Now, we might typically say that a disadvantaged student might not know loads of those words, whereas an advantaged student might know loads of the words because they go to restaurants. So in my head, when I was reading that, I was thinking, right, it's soup, possibly a 3-course meal then. Maybe somewhere where maybe the waiter's not getting paid enough, so they're expecting a tip. Maybe they're really, really trying hard so loads of things are found off because of that prior knowledge that I have.
Yeah.
And that's a huge barrier to reading for some of those students who don't have those experiences that other students have. And I don't like to call them disadvantage. I know it's a category we use, and at least it highlights that as an issue. But sometimes they might be really fluent readers, but they might not understand what they're doing, and then that might become a barrier because they don't really understand what they're reading. Am I making sense?
Yeah. Because fluency is a really complex thing, and it's not always hard words. In fact, often there can be comprehension problems around the small words like pronouns, because children being able to track who's being referred to. If you encounter the word she several sentences after that person was referred to, that can cause barriers. But the knowledge of the world makes reading a bit of a lottery, because there's no way in schools we can teach every social context, every scenario. But it is really important. What we should do is warm children up. If we know what text we're teaching, we might want to teach a few couple fewer, but really prime them for that text, give them the chance to do some repeated reading, because that's really important for fluency. Spend a bit longer getting deep into that world, because you're right, the language challenges can be really underestimated, especially if we're so used to not finding reading a challenge at all. I mean, I remember teaching a class on poetry, and I knew it was a very multilingual class, and so I was using images to illustrate most of the text. But for whatever reason, I decided I didn't need to do moss because it was everywhere. Absolutely not. Not one child knew what moss was in that class, regardless of what their first language was. So you can't overestimate. You can't overestimate the challenges that might come from what might seem to be a really simple word.
I mean, Caroline, you do a lot of guided reading in our school. So how do you get over that barrier? I know you do lots of intervention, lots of guided reading. You work with the English team. How do you get over that?
So my first and my biggest thing I work on, and it's my first target, is to just to help them feel comfortable. I purposely, so their first target, this is my first target, has been to read one page aloud with confidence. I purposely will read a page to model, but I will make mistakes when I'm reading and be like, oh, see, I've got my word muddled up, and then I'll read it again and like self-correct to model and let them know it's okay to make mistakes first off, so they feel comfortable. We'll talk about new language. So with the book we've been reading at the moment is Oranges in No Man's Land. And there's the word refugee and refuge. And we've been really looking at what they mean in context. I've tried to explain to them in real life what they might have seen in the news. Seeking refuge from the rain when it's throwing it down. So I've tried to put it into context that they understand. Yeah. But also make them comfortable that they can say, Miss, I don't know what this means. And the latest target that we're working on is looking at unfamiliar vocabulary and where we can find out what those words mean, whether it be asking me or another member of staff, dictionary skills, Google. So how can we, to make try and give them that bit of independence to find out what a word means, but also make them feel comfortable about their reading, and nothing's too silly to ask. Wow. And not be embarrassed.
It's that connecting that reading to them, isn't it? In a way they understand as well.
Yeah.
I think it is really tricky, but I think it's obviously doable. And I'm finding books, because we do the phonics project, don't we, with Year 7 as well.
Yeah, little bundle.
Yeah, and it's finding books for Year 7 students that are not the best readers. It's finding the kind of books they want to read. That's a real challenge as well. Because the problem might be the opposite there, where they've got such vast spoken language, but actually can't read it on there. So it's kind of the opposite problem. They've got lots and lots of language. So I want to be a bit controversial, only because I've been reading LinkedIn, and I know I've spoken to you about this, Caroline. There was a post on LinkedIn, and I promise this is how I feel, because people are allowed to say what they feel, and if that's what they feel, that's okay. But I think we're also allowed to debate it. I think there's a strong inference that the year of reading was more like book washing poverty. In the same way, people talk about sport washing discrimination. It's like it's the government are doing it just to hide poverty and make it. It's a cheap way of hiding it. So, what are your thoughts on that? I don't think they actually said that, but there's a very strong inference. But they were very careful how they wrote the post.
I think
they did use that.
They did use the word book wash, but it's two separate. When we went back to the original post, it was two separate issues. There is that link between disadvantaged and like literacy levels. There is, but I don't. Yeah, I don't. No.
What would your response be, Martin?
My response would be, you know, I've talked about my background and the community I come from. Now, that community's got all kinds of other challenges that face it at times in terms of, you know, it's a community that's becoming more diverse. It's traditionally been very white working class, and there's been some, I would say, bad agents that have tried to stir up bad feeling in that community. And my family, my wife is dual heritage, and my kids, and we've experienced more racism than I would like. And so but you know, it was a community we loved and cared about, and so we were there for a very long time. So, you know, I hold that really dearly to my heart. And I would never be so naive as to think that, you know, furnishing children with books, which we do, because there is real inequity around access to books in the home, and there's data that suggests it makes a very positive difference. But setting aside the data, we run the Young Readers Program. It's our longest running program, and again, I managed that for a while. And you only have to see what happens, because effectively that program is really simple. It is, here's a range of books, and you get to choose it. It's not, here is your free book. It's, you know, here's an array, you get to choose them. And we've deliberately canvassed what's likely to land well within that school. And choice is really important in this, and provision is really important. And some people aren't aware actually of what they can do if money is a challenge around, you know, access to books. You know, they might not be close to a library, but, you know, so much is online now. You know, being able to access free e-readers, audiobooks, it's like, don't miss out. But the challenge I see it often is with education is getting that message out. But that cannot detract from the challenges around, you know, the cost of living, which is exacerbating these problems. You know, as a governor, I'm not currently a governor, but the governor in last school, we had something akin to trench foot. You know, you cannot ignore the real effects of some of the ingrained poverty and the generational effects of poverty. There are strong links to literacy, so I think it's important that we're challenging that, and I think it's really wonderful that we had some seed funding. We're fundraising for the National Year of Reading. It's not like there was a big windfall. So we are using that momentum, the support of our corporate partners, trusts and foundations, other sector partners, because what we think is this is a problem that won't be solved other than through collective action. And that's kind of, Caroline, why when we were working up the schools, if I have to say, the actual campaign itself is the majority of it's focused on behaviour change outside of schools. It's about, you know, working with families. It's about changing the perception of reading. But of course, you hear National Year of Reading, you're going to think schools. Schools are going to think, well, that's us, and rightly so, because of the vital role we play in getting children to be readers. So the schools offer is deliberately designed to radiate out from what's going to be most immediately under your sphere of influence, the children in front of you, the colleagues working with you on a day-to-day basis, then across a setting, so we can talk about shared language, shared sense of purpose. We're not asking people to like do radical changes to what they provide. We're asking them to consider maybe one or two tweaks that will start to seed that reading for pleasure culture, and then we take it into the community. And our communities team are going to be working across the year in that place-based way. We've expanded our regional leads, and the communities work is working with all service providers, so social, health, because we know that the effects of poverty stretch out in all directions. So I think those challenges are really fair, because what it does is it keeps us on our toes, and it allows us not to be complacent. Because I'm going to say this, sometimes in literacy, and I've been at events where I've probably got caught up in it, we can go, isn't this wonderful? Don't we love books? And it's like, that's not really what this is about. This isn't about a Disneyfication. It's about, look, you won't necessarily be an avid reader, but, you know, if we can take out that sense of it being a chore, if we can tell you that what you're reading there via your screen, what you're reading there, listening to an audio, because audio, you mentioned about children that are in the secondary phase, that are, you know, on the Little Wandle program. Well, you know, a bit like we will say sometimes, you know, it's important to hear stories while you're learning to read, because then there's not a double deficit in terms of not developing vocabulary, not developing language. Exposure to, you know, more complex text through audiobooks is something that we should really be exploring. We're pushing that very hard this year, that other forms of reading will do important parts of the learning to read job, expanding that vocabulary, helping you to infer, helping you hear modelled, fluent, expressive reading. And that is biologically primary, because we are wired for rhythm, and there's lots of rhythm in written language, especially poetry, especially play scripts. So leaning into that in itself can be why we see such great effects from deliberate and well-planned reading fluency instruction. I think I've gone around the topic a bit, but fundamentally it's like we can't there's two things I want to avoid, because I think we need to reach the unconverted, the people that are rightly or might be rightly cynical or skeptical. And I think there's a fine line between being determinedly cynical, but there's a healthy skepticism. I think anyone in education should be healthily skeptical. That scientific sort of skepticism that says there's no magic bullet. So why are we doing this? Why is it worth of our time? Those sorts of challenges are really important, and it will keep the mission focused where it needs to be, and make sure that it doesn't overreach in terms of what it can claim to address. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think the challenge really does. It kind of. I'm often challenged on my views and my things that I post, but it kind of. One, it might sharpen. It makes you reflect. That's important, and it can also sharpen your argument. Think, oh, maybe I need to project my argument better. But also, like you say, it keeps you on track on your mission as well.
It's so easy to be complacent. If you're in a zone that you're really comfortable in, if you work on reading for pleasure all the time, I think you can slip into some degree of complacency and not be aware that there are some schools where, I mean, my first published article, and I'm going to do a shout out for someone who I think used to be, or might still be on Teacher Talk Radio, Hayley Smith, because she gave me some initial feedback, because I was quite nervous about putting it out there. But do you remember that time when Ofsted, I hope I'm allowed to say this, but do you remember that time when Ofsted were insisting on progress within 20 minutes? So that if it was lesson observation, you had to somehow miraculously show the children have all made progress in 20 minutes. Mm-hmm. At that period, I was told I wasn't allowed to read aloud to children, right? Which, when I pushed back and said, what? That this is fundamentally a really important part of primary education for me and me as a practitioner, I was told, well, where's the learning in it? And I was like, where isn't it? You know, the language, the ability to question what you're reading, the inferences you're making, the worlds you're constructing in your head, the exposure to different contexts that you might not otherwise experience, that communal responsiveness to a text. Because, you know, some kids don't naturally hook into a text and they can sit outside of that experience, but seeing how their friends are reacting can be a way to draw them in, or at least explore, well, why is that kid laughing or crying or being a bit scared? Yeah. So, yeah, I just feel what these challenges do is that they just keep people rightly on their toes and make sure we keep the main thing, but we don't, you know, make false claims around what we're trying to aim for here. We're just trying to reposition reading as something that everyone can get benefits from, and enable people to do that in a less time-consuming, less challenging way.
And reading's evolved though as well, because you say, I love reading. It automatically, this is the worst book ever for sharing. I'm not reading this one for pleasure. They just think that's reading, and it isn't. Now we've got audio books, we've got ebooks. People can read on the phones, on the devices. It is not, just a book. It has evolved. And I love the Go All In advert on the YouTube video, where it's got all different types of reading, songs on there, lyrics. It's not just a book, and I think that's where people get stuck, because it's scary looking at a book like a thick book, but they'll quite happily listen to a song and read song lyrics. And it's reading. Yeah,
they will. My daughter bought a CD. What CD did she buy the other day? I can't remember. It might be Billie Eilish. But it came out. She just, because CDs are making a comeback.
I didn't know that.
They are. They absolutely are. Well, they are in my house, anyways. My daughter's 14, and she wants to build her collection of CDs. So, but she loved the fact the CD that had the lyrics, because I think it's amazing listening to a song.
Well, I mean, we grew up on smash hits, and that was a big part of that was the lyrics. So and there's some really good stuff out there. I think it's about having that varied diet, and I also feel it's really important. We're not saying to schools, we're going to make the curriculum about song lyrics and gamification. We want children to experience really great books. And can I? Lee, do you remember I said, can I come back?
Daniel Willingham, yeah, go on.
I was trying to find the book there. So not Why Children Don't Like School, but Why the Reading Mind. Now, that is largely focused on cognition and, what goes on in the brain when you're reading. But he does a section where he talks about, we know you're a stronger reader the more you read. It has this completely predictable benefit that the more reading mileage you get, the better and stronger you get at it. And let's also be clear, it also benefits writing. I can be very clear on that. I think you ask any room of teachers, do children that read a lot tend to be better writers? and it's largely true. You get the odd one strange anomaly. But Daniel Willingham, no one really talks about this bit. There's a bit in his book where he talks about, so how do we get children wanting to read? And he says, I don't think anything, I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but he makes it very clear. He doesn't think anything can be the positive emotional associations with key memories of reading when you're young. So he makes that point. He talks about an anecdote from his own childhood, I think maybe something to do with a bookshop he used to go to, or a particular book. But I just thought, I wish that got more attention, because this is the thing. If we see children getting snuggled up with a book, with a parent, the positive associations that start early. In fact, if you want to drill into it, children hearing story, hearing the parent's voice while they're in utero. I mean, we know there's brilliant research that shows, the positive signs of that once a child's born and when they hear similar sounds. There are things that you can measure that show that they're having a positive response to that, because that's the stage when the children are being wired for the world of language. Those early first 3 years of life are so critical. So I want to do a big shout out to early years practitioners and my early years colleagues. But I mean, this campaign, if we don't get the early years bit right, that would be really critical, because so much of the foundations are laid there. And it is something around comfort. Like my mum always used to make me read the Tawny Scrawny Lion when I was a kid. And at the end, the rabbits persuaded the lion not to eat them by serving him tomato soup. And then we'd have tomato soup together. And it was a really simple little ritual. My mum was able to get us to listen to a story because I wasn't well, so I was a captive audience. And it's those little things that you can do as well, just sharing those tips around. Don't underestimate the importance of a simple cuddle. And you don't have to, if you have literacy challenges, you don't have to read. You can have an audiobook do it. It'll be lovely to be able to read and interact with the book. But seeing a child, interact, come to repeat some of the phrases, is just magic.
So it's like that, reading to your child at bedtime. It's a calm, there's a closeness there, isn't there? It's associated with just peace and safety. Yeah. I need to buy that book. So that's the reading might. It's a very good book, very nice and punchy with good summaries at the end of each chapter. But I just wish the reading for pleasure bit. It's not long, but I just wish it got a bit more attention, because Daniel Willingham does tend to shift how people perceive things. So maybe that's something I need to do. Bang more of a drum for that passage. Yeah. And I think that quote I said earlier, that truly changed how I think about reading, because I've been doing this 24 years, worked in primary, and my idea of getting better at reading is just read more. But actually, reading more is great, but it's understanding what you're reading, talking about the book, exploring the language, the etymology of it, the morphology. And because I like all that, because I'm a maths teacher as well, so there's so many words in maths that I love to go on and explore.
That disciplinary literacy, again, reading contingent is so important. Definitely. And again, being able to prime, I'm a big fan of priming, setting up for success, because if we were dictated by something like SATs, which is often, can be a test of knowledge as well. There's an advantage within, if you happen to know about potatoes and potatoes are in the test this year, there's an advantage. Beekeepers, if you had a beekeeper visit, you're going to do well or better in that section on bees. Our teaching shouldn't be too much led by that. I was a year 6 teacher for a long time, and I had to prepare my children for that test, but it wasn't the whole year. It was, let's get you really great as readers and writers, and then I'll help you with that rather peculiar thing you do at the end of the year, in terms of setting them up for success. So
getting back to that comfort and safety, one of the things that sometimes gets a bit of negative publicity is phonics. And I want to think about phonics, I'm thinking back in the early years foundation stage. Some people say it's too early. Some people say it's not the right approach. Some people say that's a great approach. It's an established pedagogy now. It works. I just wonder what your two thoughts are on pedagogy, not pedagogy, phonics even. And
I mean, I just talked a lot, so I'm happy to wait with Caroline.
Phonics and early years, because obviously, when they're learning phonics, we're learning as because reading is hard, so we know that it's hard, and we know that they will need some form of instruction to learn some of it. I don't think you ever get around that. So go on, sorry, Caroline.
So when my Molly, she's 1. She at the moment is going around Baba, Mama, Dada, and making sounds. So she's already on her phonics journey. She's making those single sounds already. And she's learning about the sounds in the world around it, and copying noises. So that's the first part of the phonics journey, is copying sounds and listening to sounds. Because our alphabet is so difficult, and there's like 165 plus different ways of spelling the sounds in English. That's why our phonics has to start so early as regards to European countries. So it is really hard. So they do. I think it is important that they have that exposure earlier on. And it's what, we've got year 7s doing Little Wandle at the moment because there's the gaps there, because there's those many, if they have time off or not quite understand certain parts, they need to go back over it later on. So phonics is really important.
Yeah, I suppose I've never worked in the early years foundation, so it kind of suits my philosophy of it's biologically secondary knowledge, so we've not evolved to read. I suppose that's my basic understanding of it. So the actual components of reading need to be put together. Actually, the sounds of making those words, but obviously the knowledge is equally important. Sorry, Martin, go on.
No, I was going to say reading is so complex, but I'm obsessed with reading and writing and the way they interact, because that's what a lot of my kind of more researchy background is based on in more recent years, just because of what I've seen from the benefits that come through from working on reading fluency. And so children that could decode but still weren't accessing text fully, once you've got that toehold in text, writing benefits. But I think the acknowledging that it's hard work, it's very much hard work in the early stages of learning to read, and that the early stages depending on when that person is at the early stage of reading. So it's not necessarily just an early years concern, but I just want to say that it's important to recognize it, because for some children, they will see other children that are accessing it far better. Some children take to the code really effortlessly, seemingly, and easily. And it's so important that children at an early age feel they're a reader. This thing that my teacher's showing me in phonics, it's for a purpose and it will work for me, so long as the teaching's strong, so long as the teaching's crisp, clear. And I do think we've made significant gains in terms of, really sorting out what it really means to be systematic, what it means to be consistent. And I think really a lot of the criticisms now will tend to be more about when, it feels like it may be overkill. But I think, I've watched so many quite joyous like phonics lessons where, because children like knowing where they stand in a lesson, they know like knowing what's expected of them, they're really up for repetition. And if you make it playful and fun, if you've got some nice songs going on and some sound work and whatnot, alongside that really crisp, clear instruction and mindfulness of who might be struggling, and thinking about where are they positioned, how are we observing them, how are we assessing them, how are we responding to that information, how are we identifying, not rushing to write off, but how we're identifying potential difficulties and remediating that, and making sure, is it a phonics challenge here or is it something else? Is there, is it, because you only need a couple of middle ear infections to have real troubles with that sound articulation and the skills that are central to being successful in phonics. So it's really about knowing the readers, and that extends across the whole of what actually makes up reading. I think the more we can know our readers, the better. And the more, one thing I would love is there to be less of a lottery around access to diagnostic assessments, expert support, and inputs around speech and language. I think that would be something that in a dream world would all have on a far fairer, equal footing across the nations.
Yeah.
Thank you. Right, we'll have a little pause there and we'll come back for some final thoughts, because we've almost done an hour. It's gone incredibly quickly. So it's got a couple of readouts to do, and I'll be back with you in a second. So Hachette Learning, they said this show is brought to you in partnership with Hachette Learning, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great learning, teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit www.hachetlearning.com to explore the full range of titles. And here's a big shout out, Teachers Talk Connect 2026. Okay, so Teachers Talk Connect is back. It's the Teachers Talk annual CPD and networking extravaganza. Join the TTR team on Saturday, the 14th of March in Manchester, and tickets are free. I have actually seen some of the speakers for this on LinkedIn. Absolutely amazing. So what you're waiting for, head over to ttradio.org, Connect 2026. So some final thoughts. I just want to say thank you to both of you, because I feel like I've learned more in the last hour than I've learned about reading in perhaps the last, I don't know, years. It's really made me think about reading. So thank you so much. And I know a lot of people have actually been listening in as well, and I'm sure more will take on the recording as well. So Caroline, any final thoughts?
For me personally, if anybody would like to become a literacy champion for the National Literacy Trust, I will put the link on your LinkedIn post, Lee, to help in your community to get, create that positive reading culture and enhance it around where you live.
And look out for Caroline on LinkedIn. You do a few posts, Caroline. You're doing more and more.
Yes, I'm getting a bit brave now.
You have to be brave here. Sometimes, you get a bit of comeback, but it's kind of a nice space. It is.
Yes.
It is. Martin.
Yeah, I don't do a lot of LinkedIn at the moment, not by choice. It's just this is happening really fast. I do think it's been the busiest time of my life after about, I don't know, 25 odd years in education. So, forgive me for that. But what I would say is if you go to the National Literacy Trust website and put in National Year of Reading Schools, there is a National Year of Reading website dedicated to that. But if you go to the NLT site, there's a schools page. It allows you to, there's two ways you can interact with the year. If you're in a school or early year setting, you can either, choose what you want to go and sign up as it happens. Or if you wanted to join us on the learning management system, there's no cost, but it will allow you to see what's on offer across early years, primary, secondary. It will showcase the great work of schools. It means that you can go in, sorry to be cheesy, but to take the badge, go all in and, take part across each of the 3 terms. There's a participation award. So for each term you take part, there's a participation award. And if you do something deeper, like take part in a reading development program, or you do some action research and you share it, or a case study, then there's a reading culture award that will be given at the end of the year with all kinds of facets for your school. And we're hoping to develop really great communities of practice here. That's going to be the really key thing, a chance to meet other like-minded professionals and really share time efficient, because Lord knows that's critical, time efficient ways to boost that reading pleasure for culture, whether you're really far into that journey and doing great stuff, or whether it's something a bit newer for your setting. So yeah, head that way, I'd say.
And reading needs to be fun. We need to make it fun, and to get the kids hooked in.
Well, thank you both for I know, Martin, you're not been very well, so thank you for battling through that.
No worries. I'm going to go and crash now on the sofa for an hour.
Yeah, I don't blame you. Caroline, I know you're an incredibly busy mum, teacher, literacy champion, and then I asked you to do this, so thank you so much. And I'm sure lots of people who have been listening will really appreciate it as well. So I'm going to roll the final credits, but thank you so much. It's been a great show. I've really enjoyed it, and thank you.
Thank you.